He hadn't meant to ride that way. Wade Callahan had planned to take the North Trail to check the ridge fencing, maybe stop by the Taylor farm to trade for some nails. But something pulled him west instead, toward the old mining path no one used anymore, where the trees leaned in like watchers and the ground stayed damp even in summer. Maybe it was the way his horse jerked its head or the strange ache he'd woken with in his chest that morning. Either way, that's where he went, with the sun already low and the quiet pressing in close. Wade wasn't the kind of man to believe in signs. 32 years old, ranch-born and raised on dust and hard lessons, he knew better than to trust feelings. But he'd been carrying something heavy inside him lately, and he couldn't name it. It wasn't just loneliness, though that was part of it. It was the silence of his house when he came home from long rides. The way the floor creaked at night, and nobody answered when he spoke. Sometimes he said things out loud just to hear a voice. Other times, he stayed quiet for days. The path curved around a stretch of twisted pines, and that's when he saw it. A small shack, barely standing, tucked between the trees like it was trying to hide. It was the kind of place kids dared each other to go into, all rot and rust and shadows. Wade slowed his horse, boots tightening against the stirrups. Something wasn't right. The door hung off its hinges, and broken glass littered the weeds near the steps. He swung down without thinking, rifle still holstered but close. The inside stank of mildew and something worse, something sharp and wrong. Wade paused just inside the doorway, letting his eyes adjust. That's when he heard the sound. Not a voice, not crying, just a soft, rhythmic tapping like fingernails against wood. He turned his head and saw it. A cage. It wasn't large, made from chicken wire and splinter boards. It sat in the corner like an ugly secret. Inside it, a girl. Maybe 12, maybe younger. Thin, barefoot, knees pulled to her chest. She didn't move when he stepped closer, just looked at him with wide, flat eyes like a deer in deep winter. Her face was smudged, her lips cracked. Her hair stuck to her cheeks in knots. And there was a note, nailed crudely to the top beam of the cage. Just 3 words, scratched in red. Not good enough. Wade didn't remember drawing his knife, but the next thing he knew, he was cutting the wire with slow, careful hands. The girl flinched at the sound, but she didn't speak. She didn't even breathe different. He crouched low, his voice rough and quiet. "I'm talking you out of here, all right?" She didn't nod, didn't move. He reached in slowly, like approaching a wounded colt, and when his hand brushed hers, her skin was ice. It took time to get her on the horse. She didn't want to be touched, not really. Wouldn't look at him either. Just let herself be lifted like she wasn't part of her own body. He wrapped his coat around her, even though the sun still burned above the trees. Something about her shook more than cold could cause. Wade didn't ask questions. Not yet. She wouldn't have answered. And besides, he was still trying to catch up with the fact of what he'd seen. A girl, caged like an animal, left with a note that felt like a slap to the soul. Not good enough. Who in hell would write that? Who would leave a child in a place like that? By the time they reached the ranch, the light was gone. Wade lived far from town by choice. His land spread wide and quiet, tucked against the hills with no one but cows and fences for company. He carried the girl inside and set her gently on the cot near the stove. The fire hadn't been lit in days, but he worked quickly to fix that, stacking kindling with shaking hands. He still hadn't said more than a few words, and she hadn't said a single one. Her name came later, whispered like it hurt to speak. Lena. Just that. Nothing else. No last name. No place she came from. She wouldn't meet his eyes. The next few hours passed in silence. Wade made soup. She didn't eat. He offered her a bath. She didn't move. So he sat nearby and let the quiet stretch between them, trying to make sense of the knot in his chest that kept tightening every time he looked her way. He didn't sleep that night. Sat in the chair by the fire while she lay curled on the cot, still wrapped in his coat. She didn't cry, didn't ask for anything, just stared into nothing with that same blank, stunned face. Wade knew trauma when he saw it, had seen enough of it in himself, in friends returned from war, in orphan boys left behind after prairie raids. But this was different. This was a wound that didn't bleed but seeped through everything, quiet and invisible. By morning, he decided she wasn't going back. Whoever did that to her, whoever wrote those words and left her behind like trash, didn't deserve a second of her breath. Wade didn't know how to be a father. Hell, he didn't even know how to talk to kids. But he could build things. He could fix fences. He could fight when he needed to. And he could keep her safe. That much he swore. Lena didn't ask why she was there. She didn't ask about where they were going or what would happen next. But when he offered her a blanket, she took it. When he left a bowl of water and a rag beside the cot, she cleaned her hands slowly, as if testing if it was real. And when he came back from the barn that evening, her eyes flicked toward him for just a second. Not long, but enough to know she was still in there, behind the quiet. Wade didn't tell anyone about her. Not yet. He knew what folks in town could be like. Gossip hungry and fast to judge. If she was found like that, questions would come. The wrong kind of attention. And Wade wasn't ready to trust anyone else with her. Not until he knew who did this and whether they were still out there. But something had changed in him deep down. The part that had felt hollow for so long. The part he thought would never fill again was stirring. Lena had brought something with her. Not just pain, not just silence, but a need he couldn't explain. A need to protect, to mend, to matter. And as the fire flickered low that second night and the wind howled outside like it had something to say, Wade Callahan sat beside that broken girl and realized this wasn't just rescue. It was the start of something neither of them understood yet. Wade hadn't told a soul about Lena, but keeping a secret like that doesn't last long in a place like Fallon Creek. His ranch sat a good 10 miles from town, and most folks knew Wade didn't come around often unless he needed something. So when he showed up 2 days later, hat pulled low, supplies in hand, and a shadow behind his eyes, Sheriff Denny Carter took notice. Denny was no fool. He'd known Wade since they were boys, back when they'd roamed the same dirt roads and fought over the same baseball bat made from a broken chair leg. Wade had always been quiet, the kind of boy who'd take a punch without flinching and never say why he took it. Denny had grown up to wear a badge and a clean shirt. Wade had grown up to break horses and lose things he didn't speak of. But under the differences, Denny still trusted him. "You all right?" he asked, squinting as Wade unloaded sacks of flour and soap. "Fine," Wade said without looking up. Denny's hand rested on his belt. "Heard from Mabel you took extra blankets. That's not like you." Wade paused just for a second. Weather turned. Denny didn't push it. Not yet. But he'd seen something in Wade's face, a tightness, a weight he was carrying. And while he walked back to his office, he made a note to check in again soon. Back at the ranch, Lena was still quiet. She watched the world from behind the windows like it was something dangerous. She didn't ask about Wade's trips or where the chickens came from or what his dog's name was. But she followed the dog sometimes, slow, silent steps in the dirt, never touching, just watching. The dog, an old mutt named Duke, seemed to understand her better than most folks could. He didn't bark, didn't nudge. He just sat close when she came near, his tail sweeping the ground gently. Wade's neighbor, Alma Reeves, showed up that weekend. She was 50 and sharp, a widow with a tongue like a whip and hands that never stopped moving. She'd raised 4 boys and outlived 2 husbands. She knew when something was off. Wade had never let her near his house before, but he hadn't counted on her walking straight into the kitchen with a pie and a scowl. "I saw the smoke. Figured you weren't dead. Figured you might be hungry," she said, already pulling off her gloves. Wade stood there, awkward and unsure. "You shouldn't have come." "Don't be stupid," she said, setting the pie down. Then she paused, eyes narrowing. "Someone's been here. Someone small." He didn't answer. Alma moved through the room like she owned it, glancing at the boots by the stove, too small for a grown man. Her gaze flicked to the rag drying by the basin, then to the cot, still rumpled, with a lock of dark hair clinging to the pillow. "I see," she said finally. "I won't ask." Wade looked at her, surprised. She gave a hard look. But if you need help, you'll say it. I'm not letting you mess this up alone. It wasn't until she'd left that Lena appeared from behind the curtain. Wade saw the way she watched Alma's tracks fade into the dust, her brow furrowed, her hands twitching at her sides. She didn't say it, but he could tell she didn't trust anyone yet. Not even kind, loud Alma. Still, Alma returned the next day. And the next. She brought bread and cloth, a book with drawings, and eventually a mirror. Every girl needs to see herself, she said, setting it on the table with finality. Lena didn't touch it for a week, but Wade noticed she glanced at it when she thought no one was watching. The quiet between them began to shift. Lena still didn't talk, not unless it was just one or two words. Yes, no, maybe. But she started following Wade when he fed the horses. She'd trail him at a distance, never too close, but always there. He started leaving a stool by the barn wall, and one day she sat on it, clutching a piece of twine she wound tightly around her fingers. She was watching, learning, and Wade, for all his stiffness, began to talk. Not to her exactly, more like near her. Stories about the animals, about when he was a kid, about the time a hawk got into the chicken coop and stirred up all hell. He never asked her questions. But one day, after he told her how he broke his leg falling from a hayloft, she whispered, "Did it bleed?" He froze, then nodded. Yeah, like a stuck pig. Her eyes narrowed, like she was filing that answer away. Then she said nothing more for 2 days. Fallon Creek wasn't a big town, and secrets had a way of leaking. Folks noticed Alma going to Wade's place more than usual. Someone mentioned seeing a figure in his window. Talk started to stir. That's when Lydia Fenwick got involved. Lydia was the preacher's wife, and she wore righteousness like perfume. Her smile never reached her eyes, and her kindness had a hook in it. She came to Wade's ranch with a plate of biscuits and questions hidden in sweet words. "We've been worried," she said, stepping off her buggy like she owned the dirt. "Haven't seen you at service. And there's talk. Well, people are wondering if you're all right." Wade knew what she was really asking. His jaw tightened. "I'm fine. Is there someone else here with you?" she asked lightly, peering past him. No, it wasn't a lie. At that moment, Lena was hidden in the barn, high in the loft behind bales of hay. Wade had warned her when he saw Lydia coming down the road. Lydia left with a smile that said she didn't believe him. And by sundown, more questions were spreading through town. Then he heard them too, at the saloon at the feed store. He came by the next day. "Wade," he said, stepping off his horse. "I gotta ask you straight." Wade didn't answer, just stood with his hands in his pockets, the wind stirring dust between them. "You hiding someone?" Wade met his eyes. "You ever see a kid locked in a cage?" Then he blinked, caught off guard. Wade went on, "I did, and I brought her out. That's all you need to know." Then he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You know I'll have to file something. It ain't legal to keep her without talking to someone official." "She's not a stray," Wade said. "She's broken. Whoever did that to her might come looking. I'm not handing her to anyone till I know she's safe." Then he sighed. "You always did things your own way, and I always will." Then he rode off, but Wade knew the clock was ticking now. If someone came forward, claimed they were a kin, or worse, if the person who locked her up wanted her back, there'd be trouble. And Wade wasn't the only one thinking it. Lena had started drawing. Alma had given her a pencil and paper, and some nights Wade found pictures tucked under the stove or folded near the cot. Some were of animals, crooked houses. But one drawing stopped him cold, a figure with dark eyes holding a long stick, another one of a cage, and another of a face crossed out. There were things Lena hadn't said yet, things buried deep, and someone out there, Wade figured, had secrets too, secrets they didn't want spoken. He was no lawman, no father, no hero, but now, more than ever, he knew this wasn't just about saving a girl. It was about protecting the truth, and truth had a way of clawing its way out. One secret at a time. The sky over Fallon Creek shifted early that week, gray clouds, wind that spoke through the trees like it carried warnings. Wade felt the shift before anything happened. It was in Lena's behavior, too. She stopped trailing him to the barn and began checking the windows more often, listening for horses that weren't his, jumping when Duke barked at nothing. Something in her had tightened again, like all the quiet safety they'd built between them was starting to fray. Wade tried to hold on to the routine. He kept the fire going, let Alma bring her pie, and knit in silence. Kept his voice steady when talking near Lena, even though his own chest felt full of nails. Denny hadn't come back, but Wade saw the pressure building in town. More whispers, more watching eyes, and Lydia Fenwick sending her husband to check on the spiritual state of Wade's homestead. The preacher didn't get out of his buggy, just sat at the end of the path, hat in hand, eyes scanning the porch. Wade didn't come out. Neither did Lena, but they both watched. Then came the sound that ruined the quiet. A single horse, hard gallop, late evening. Wade stepped out with his rifle in hand, expecting Denny, maybe a neighbor. But it was a stranger, a tall man, face thin as a shovel, clothes too clean for a real cowboy. He rode straight up like he owned the land. "You Wade Callahan?" he called, dismounting with a practiced air. "Who's his skin?" "Name's Carl Winton. I work with children's welfare out of Dodge." Wade's jaw tightened. "You're awful far from Dodge." Winton smiled like it didn't reach his eyes. "We got a report. Said a minor female was seen on your property. A girl. Quiet. Malnourished." Wade said nothing. "Now, I ain't here to cause you trouble," Winton said, already stepping up onto the porch. "But if you're harboring a runaway or someone who don't belong to you, I need to see her. And I need to take her." Inside the house, Lena had vanished. Wade had told her long ago, if someone came with papers or questions, she was to hide in the cellar. But this man didn't look like the kind to knock and wait. His eyes were scanning windows, corners, boots by the door. Wade didn't move from the top step. "You got proof you're who you say?" Winton pulled out a piece of paper, folded 4 times. It had a stamp and a signature, but Wade had seen enough liars with letterhead to know better. "I got reason to believe," Wade said slowly, "that girl was left in a cage. Out west, near the old mining shack. You know anything about that?" Winton's face didn't change, but he blinked a little too slow. "That's so," he said. "That's a hell of an accusation. You deny it. I ain't confirming anything either." And that's when Wade knew. This man wasn't from any real agency. He was looking for Lena, not to protect her, not to help, but to reclaim her, like property. "I'd like you to leave," Wade said, his voice low and even. Winton smiled wider this time. "That ain't how this works." But he left, not before running his hand over the porch rail, like he was marking the place. Not before giving Wade a long, cold look that said he'd be back, with help, with muscle, with force. Wade watched him ride off, then bolted the doors and pulled the cellar hatch. Lena stared up at him, hands shaking, eyes wild. She didn't ask questions, just said, "He's the one." And then she cried. Not like a child, but like someone older, wounded, betrayed, terrified. Wade held her for the first time, not because he thought it would fix anything, but because he didn't know what else to do. His arms wrapped around her small frame, and she shook like a tree in wind. And in that moment, he swore she was not going back. That night, he saddled 2 horses, packed food, stashed some of his cash into a tin. He didn't tell Alma, didn't tell Denny, just rode out with Lena in the dark, heading east through the hills where the map turned vague and the trees gave better cover. They rode 2 days, camped without fire. Lena didn't talk much, but she stayed close. On the 3rd night, it happened. They stopped near an old wash, tucked into a grove. Wade was out gathering kindling when he heard hooves. He dropped the sticks and pulled his rifle just in time to see a shadow dismounting behind the trees. It was Denny. "What the hell are you doing, Wade?" he hissed, raising his hands when Wade aimed the gun. Wade didn't lower it. "She's not safe. I know that. That's why I'm here. You followed us?" "I had to." Denny stepped closer. "I looked into that Winton fellow. Ain't no records. Ain't no agency badge. I think he's lying, same as you." Wade narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean, same as me?" "I mean, you've been hiding a girl for weeks, not talking to no one, not even me. That kind of thing makes good men look guilty." I was protecting her. I believe that. Denny's voice softened. But Wade, you can't keep running. He'll come with more next time. Not alone. Not bluffing. Wade looked toward the trees where Lena waited. She was peering out, eyes reflecting firelight, face unreadable. Denny lowered his voice. Let me help. Let's take her somewhere safe. Official. Quiet. I got a cousin near Wichita. She runs a private shelter. No one will find her there. I don't trust anyone, Wade said. You'll have to trust someone eventually, or she'll spend her life hiding. Wade didn't answer. He just stared into the night and listened for sounds that weren't there yet. The next morning, they turned toward Wichita, but it was too late. Halfway down the pass, they found the trail blocked. For men, one of them was Winton. Another had a deputy star, but Wade knew he wasn't real law. Hired muscle. Guns showed under their coats. Winton smiled again. You run pretty fast for a man with nothing to hide. Denny stepped forward. You've got no jurisdiction. Don't need it, Winton said. The girl's mine. She's no one's, Wade growled. Lena stood behind him, shaking again. Then Winton made a mistake. He stepped toward her. Wade didn't shoot to kill, but the warning shot snapped a branch near Winton's feet. The standoff froze the moment. For a second, no one moved. Then Denny drew his weapon too, aimed at the man with the star. You want to explain that badge? He asked. Because I'm pretty sure the real deputy's name is Harlan, and you ain't him. The fake deputy paled. Things turned fast. Guns out. Yelling. Winton tried to grab Lena, but she bit him hard, and Wade lunged. Fists flew. Dust kicked up. Denny tackled one man. Wade slammed Winton into the dirt. Blood. Screams. The dog, Duke, came out of nowhere, barking and snarling. When it ended, two of the men ran. One lay groaning. Winton was coughing blood and rage. Denny stood over him, gun shaking. You come near her again, he said, and I'll bury you myself. They didn't press charges. There weren't official laws to cover what had happened. But word spread. Denny made sure of it. That girl's under protection now, he told anyone who asked. No questions. No visits. Anyone comes sniffing, they answer to me. Lena never went back to the ranch. But she didn't vanish either. She stayed in Wichita with Denny's cousin. Her hair grew long. She started drawing again, this time pictures with color. Wade visited once a month. She didn't say much, but she'd sit by him while he talked. And every visit, she asked him to bring Duke. Wade still lived quiet, still worked the land. But something in him had changed. He was no longer a man, just surviving. He had someone in the world who looked for him, trusted him, chose him, and that changed everything. Winter came early to Fallon Creek that year. The cold crept in through the cracks of Wade's ranch house like it belonged there. Snow dusted the porch before November, and the wind blew so sharp it felt like it could cut through bone. Wade didn't mind the cold. He'd lived most of his life braced against one storm or another. But this time, the quiet didn't comfort him the way it used to. This time, the silence felt too big. Lena hadn't spoken to him in over a week. She was safe in Wichita, under Denny's cousin's care. Marla, a brisk woman with soft eyes who ran her home like a schoolhouse and a shelter all at once. The last time Wade visited, Lena sat stiff beside him, polite but withdrawn. She answered his questions with short nods, kept her eyes on the window, and didn't even pet Duke when the old mutt nudged her leg. When he got up to leave, she whispered bye, but it felt like goodbye. Wade rode back home through the snow with something heavy sitting on his chest. He couldn't name it, but felt like grief. Not the kind you get when someone dies, but the kind that comes when something starts to slip away and you can't stop it. Maybe it was bound to happen. Maybe all he'd ever been was a shelter, a wall between her and the world. And now that the real healing was supposed to start, she didn't need him anymore. He told himself that was a good thing. Told himself that's what he wanted. But it didn't feel good. It felt like being left behind. Back in Fallon Creek, talk had died down, but not completely. Most folks had let it go, especially after Denny made his position clear. But Lydia Fenwick wasn't the kind of woman to drop things easily. She'd taken the matter to the church board, to her husband, to anyone who'd listen. She never said Wade's name outright, but everyone knew who she meant when she spoke of moral ambiguity and reckless guardianship. Denny kept her off his back as best he could, but Wade saw the glances at the feed store, the sudden quiet when he walked into the mercantile. Some folks avoided him now, not out of fear, but uncertainty. They didn't know what he'd done or how to make sense of it, and that suited Wade fine, except on the days when it didn't. On the days when he wished someone would ask him what it felt like to hold a shivering child in his arms and know she'd been thrown away like garbage. Alma still came around, still brought stew and patched his coats. But even she could see something had changed. She's trying to find her own footing, Alma said, sitting on his porch one morning with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. That takes space. I gave her space, Wade muttered. You gave her air, not space. There's a difference. Wade didn't answer, just stared out across the field, watching Duke bark at a crow like it was his personal enemy. Alma touched his hand gently. You were her safe place. That don't mean you get to be her forever. He didn't know why those words cut so deep. Maybe because they were true. Maybe because a part of him had let himself believe that saving her meant she'd stay. That he'd found something lasting in her presence. But she wasn't his to keep, and she never said she wanted to be. Then came the letter. It was a cold morning. Frost on the glass, breath like smoke. The letter had no return address, just a stamp from Dodge and a single name scrawled in the corner. L. Callahan. Wade sat down before he opened it, already bracing for whatever truth waited inside. Inside was one page. Short, handwritten in small, neat script. I think about the snow sometimes. The way it looked on the porch. The way you didn't speak unless you had to. I still draw. Marla says my pictures are better now. She says I look people in the eyes more. But sometimes I still see him. In dreams. Sometimes I wake up and think I'm back in that cage. Then I remember your voice saying, I'm talking you out of here. That's the voice I hold on to. You saved me, Wade. But I don't know who I am yet. I need to find out without you watching. Don't be sad. I still think of you. Every day. Lena. Wade didn't cry. He sat with the letter in his hands until the stove went cold. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of a drawer, behind old receipts and letters he never sent. She wasn't saying goodbye. She was saying she needed room to become something more than what had been done to her. He could understand that, even if it broke something open inside him. And then, just as the winter settled in for good, something else shifted. Then he came by in a storm. Hat soaked, eyes sharp. We got trouble, he said, shutting the door hard behind him. Winton's back. Wade stood so fast the chair scraped across the floor. What? He was seen outside Wichita, asking questions, talking to folks he shouldn't be. I think he knows where she is. Wade's stomach turned. I thought we made it clear. We did, but people like him don't let go easy. He's not just after her. I think he's covering something ugly. Maybe more girls. Maybe worse. Wade's hands clenched. I'll go. I'll bring her back here. No, Denny said firmly. That's exactly what he wants. You show up. It gives him an excuse to say she's being moved around. Hidden. It makes you look like a kidnapper. Wade's jaw tightened. So what do we do? I'm going there myself. Quiet. Talk to Marla. We'll keep Lena safe. But you, Wade, you need to stay put. You're the one person who could blow this open if he tries anything stupid. We need your name clean if this goes to court. It wasn't what Wade wanted to hear. Every part of him screamed to ride east, find Lena, get between her and danger again. But he knew Denny was right. Emotion had carried him this far. Now was time for strategy. And waiting. The days dragged. Wade worked himself raw fixing the barn roof, chopping extra firewood, patching the north fence. Anything to keep his hands busy. At night, he sat by the fire and read her letter again and again, searching for some sign that she'd be all right. The world outside his ranch no longer felt distant. It felt like it was inching closer with every sunrise. Then came the second letter. This one wasn't from Lena. It was from Winton, delivered by hand. No postage, left stuck to his gate. It read, You think you can hide her from me? You think you're a hero? She was never yours to save. She belonged to a system. And systems don't forget. You made an enemy. And you're not the only one with secrets. Wade stared at the paper, so long the ink bled in the snow. He'd expected retaliation. But this wasn't just revenge. It was a warning. Winton wasn't giving up. He was escalating. And Wade knew, without question, that the next move would be cruel, calculated, and personal. He spent that night at the table, shotgun on one side, her letter on the other. If Winton wanted a war, he'd get one. But not on Wade's terms. Wade would wait, and when Winton made a mistake, and he would, Wade would be ready. Because now, the stakes weren't just about a girl in a cage. They were about truth, about power, about what happens when a man refuses to let evil pretend it's something else. Wade had already broken the rules once to protect Lena. Now, he'd tear them apart. The sun didn't rise easy the day it all came to a head. Wade hadn't slept. He sat on his porch, coffee long gone cold, Duke asleep at his feet, watching the horizon for movement. The letter from Winton still sat in his coat pocket, damp and wrinkled, but Wade had read it enough times that it burned behind his eyes. Every line felt like a challenge and a promise. 3 days had passed since Denny left for Wichita. No word, no telegram, just silence. Wade didn't like silence anymore. Not that kind. Not when a girl's life might be balancing on it. It was late morning when hooves finally broke the quiet. Wade was already on his feet when Denny rode in fast. Mud on his boots and a look on his face that made Wade's chest knot before he spoke a word. "He's got her," Denny said, barely slowing his horse. Wade felt everything in him stop. What? Winton came to the shelter 2 nights ago. He had forged papers, court orders, placement records. Claimed to be from State Protective Services. Said he was taking her for reassessment. Marla didn't have a choice. He took her. Where? Wade's voice cracked. We don't know. He left town that night. I've got the marshals trying to track his movements, but it's like he vanished. Wade stood still for a long moment, then turned back inside, calm as ice. Denny followed him through the door, breath short. Wade, I know where he's going, Wade said flatly. Denny paused. Where? That old mining shack. The first place I found her. He built that cage once. He'll go back to where he still thinks no one's looking. Denny cursed under his breath. You can't go alone. You set yourself. I'm the one who can end this. Denny's face was pale. If he's smart, he's armed. If he's angry, he's dangerous. Wade picked up his rifle. I'm both. The ride west was silent except for wind and hoofbeats. Denny came too. He wouldn't let Wade go alone. They rode hard through scrub and slope until the land began to change, until the ground turned to packed earth and the trees crept in tight like sentinels. Wade's knuckles were white on the reins. His thoughts stayed fixed on Lena's face, how she looked last time he saw her, that thin smile, those eyes that had finally started to believe the world might not always hurt. By the time they reached the clearing, the sun was low, bruised purple behind the trees. The shack stood just like before, still slumped, still rotting, but now something new had joined it. A wagon. A campfire. A tension in the air that made Wade's skin crawl. They dismounted quietly, tying the horses low in the scrub. Wait for my signal, Wade told Denny. He approached with his rifle low but ready, boots silent on the dirt. As he neared the shack, he heard it. Movement. Not just Winton. Someone else. A voice. Small. Barely a whisper. Please. It was Lena. Wade moved faster now, around the corner of the shack. And then he saw them. Winton sat on a crate, a pistol resting on his knee like it was part of him. Lena was near the fire, hands bound, but upright. Alive, eyes wide when they caught his. Back again, Winton said, not surprised. Wade didn't raise the rifle. Not yet. You got no right. I have every right, Winton snapped, standing now. This girl was never yours. She's a ward, a case number, an unfit soul that the system spit out. I've cleaned up messes like her for 10 years. No family, no purpose. You think she's special? She's just another mouth the state didn't want to feed. Wade's jaw tightened. You talk like she's trash, like she's less than human. She is, Winton said too quickly, too loud. You don't know where she came from. Her mother was a prostitute. Her father? No one knows. I've seen what that does to children. They grow wild, angry, sick. You locked her in a cage. To save her from herself, Wade finally raised a rifle. No, you did it because it made you feel powerful. Winton laughed bitterly. I saved kids for a decade. And you think you're the hero, walking in with your quiet voice and your dog and your sad eyes? You know what happens to little girls like her when you save them? They grow up angry, damaged. They become women like her mother. You think you're stopping that cycle? I think I already did, Wade said. Winton's hand twitched toward his pistol, but he didn't get there. One shot cracked through the dusk. Denny had circled around. The bullet tore through Winton's shoulder, dropping him to his knees with a cry of rage. Wade rushed forward, rifle still trained on him as he kicked the pistol away and dropped beside Lena. She was shaking again, but her eyes were clear. She looked at him, blinked once, and whispered, "You came." He cut her ropes with trembling hands. Winton lay groaning in the dirt, spitting curses. Then he stood over him. "We've got witnesses. We've got motive. You're going to prison." Winton laughed, bitter and hoarse. "You think the state cares? They'll bury this like they bury the others." Then he pressed the barrel of his pistol to the dirt beside Winton's head. "Then we'll make noise. And we won't stop." Back in Fallon Creek, the storm hit harder than anyone expected. The trial came fast. Winton's record was dirty. Dozens of cases of misconduct, overlooked by a system too large and too broken to see its own cracks. But with Lena's testimony, delivered in a quiet courtroom with Wade in the back row and Denny by her side, it became undeniable. She told them everything. The cage, the note, the words that had broken her, and the voice that had brought her out. "I thought I was nothing," she said, her voice small but steady, until someone didn't walk away. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even Lydia Fenwick was there, sitting stiff and pale in the back, her righteous fury dimmed to shame. Winton was sentenced to 30 years, and even that didn't feel like enough. Afterward, Lena stayed in Wichita, but not at Marla's anymore. She moved in with a couple who ran an art studio and fostered girls who'd been through similar things. She wrote to Wade often now. Her letters were longer, sometimes funny, sometimes full of pictures she'd drawn, sunsets, horses, one of Duke sleeping with his tongue out. One letter said, "I'm not scared at night anymore. That's because of you." And Wade, he kept the letters in a box now, not hidden, right out in the open on the shelf by the window. He didn't need to be her father. He didn't need to be her forever. But he'd been her safe place once, when the world had given up on her. And in the end, that was enough. Because saving her didn't fix him. But it reminded him that he was still someone worth being. Spring crept in quietly, softening the hard lines winter had carved into Fallon Creek. Snowmelt ran in shallow rivulets across the fields, and the trees budded again, reaching toward skies that no longer seemed so heavy. Wade sat on his porch most mornings, coffee in hand, Duke curled in his boots. The house was still, as it had always been, but not empty. Not in the way it used to feel. Lena's last letter had come 2 weeks ago. It wasn't long, just a single page, written in blue ink that curved gently across the paper. She told him about a painting she was working on for a gallery in Wichita. A girl standing on a cliff, looking out at a wide-open plain, wind lifting her hair, eyes forward. She didn't say it was her, but Wade knew. She'd signed the bottom in big block letters, then added a little smiley face beside it, like she wanted him to know she was all right. Like she wanted him to smile, too. He did, just a little. He thought about writing back. He always did, but he never sent letters. Not because he didn't want to, but because she didn't need word from him anymore to know how he felt. She carried his voice with her now, and he carried hers. Sometimes, when he lay awake at night, he thought about the first time he saw her, that fragile little figure curled in a cage like something already half dead. He didn't know then that she'd become the most permanent part of his life. He hadn't saved her to be a hero. He'd done it because no decent man could have walked away. But over time, she'd become something more than just a choice he made one night. She'd become a mirror of all the broken, forgotten things in him he never spoke of all the quiet strength he never knew he had. Wade hadn't changed much on the outside. He still rode into town once a week for supplies, still patched his own fence posts, fixed his own boots, ate simple meals at his table with no one across from him. But inside, he felt different, more settled, more like someone who had made peace with his place in the world. Alma came by often, sometimes just to scold him for letting the porch sag, sometimes to bring fresh bread or ask how Duke was holding up. She never pushed him to talk about Lena, though Wade caught her glancing at the letters on the shelf more than once. "She's doing all right, huh?" she said one evening, stirring sugar into her tea. "Yeah," Wade said quietly. "Better than all right." Alma smiled into her cup. "You miss her?" Wade didn't answer at first. Then, every day, Alma nodded, satisfied with that truth. Not long after, a stranger came through town, young, eager, with a camera slung around his neck and questions about Wade. Said he was writing a piece for a big city paper. Said someone had told him about the cowboy who found the girl in the cage and didn't walk away. Wanted a story. Wade listened, arms crossed, then said plainly, "Tell the story if you want. Just don't put my name in it." "Why not?" the young man asked. Wade shrugged. "Because it was never about me." He didn't see the article when it came out, but someone did. A copy of the paper arrived by post 2 weeks later. No return address, just folded neatly and slipped into a brown envelope. Wade read it once quietly. The story had no names, no town listed. Just a title at the top, "The Girl Who Walked Out of the Cage." At the end, the writer included a quote that wasn't Wade's, but felt like it could have been. "You don't always have to fix someone to save them. Sometimes it's enough just to stand between them and the thing that's trying to swallow them whole." He put the paper away, not on the shelf, not in the drawer, just under the corner of the lamp where he could see it now and then when the light hit just right. The final letter came in early summer. It was longer than the others. Lena wrote about finishing school, about moving in her own place with 2 other girls she trusted. She told him she'd applied for a grant to keep painting and that someone had bought her first piece. She didn't say how much, but she said she used the money to buy herself a coat. A green one. Not too fancy, just warm. Then she wrote something that stopped Wade cold. "I used to wonder why you didn't ask me to stay. Why you never said you wanted me to live there forever. For a long time, I thought maybe I wasn't enough. But now I think you knew something I didn't. That healing isn't about holding on. It's about letting someone grow roots of their own. You let me grow." She ended the letter with, "You're the reason I believe in good people. I hope you know that. I love you. I really do." There was no return address. No reply expected. Just a closing line. "Maybe I'll see you again one day. Maybe not. Either way, you'll always be with me." Wade sat with that letter a long time. The breeze rattled the screen door behind him, and Duke came to rest his head on Wade's knee. The sun hung low over the pasture, golden and slow. Wade thought about her voice, her drawings, the way she used to look up at him without quite trusting him, but wanting to, and how that trust, when it finally came, had been the greatest gift he'd ever been given. He didn't cry, not because he couldn't, but because the ache in his chest wasn't grief. It was pride, a quiet, deep pride in who she'd become. The world had tried to write her off, try to lock her up, throw away the key, label her as not good enough. But she had survived all of that. She had come out stronger, softer, unbroken. And maybe he had, too. That night, Wade lit a lantern and walked out past the barn, where the stars were bright and sharp above the fields. He didn't say anything out loud, just stood still for a while, thinking about cages and choices and the way life can turn in a second when someone decides to care. He stayed out there until the stars blurred, until the silence didn't feel so heavy. Then he went inside. Tomorrow would come, like it always did, and Wade Callahan, quiet cowboy, would be ready.